he got out of the car and is walking down the avenue at Pennsylvania. Now, whether this is an intention to walk the 1.5 miles, we have no idea. This was not planned. It was not scheduled. There was no mention made of it. And whether this is the Carter surprise for his inaugural, by golly, Bob, how about that? Whether I don't know whether he's going to do this and just get in his car now down at the base of the hill. He's now on the hill up, still approaching Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, you know, one of the things that I learned, Walter, in the last couple of months that I spent down at Plains after I switched over from covering President Ford during the campaign to covering Governor Carter, Mr. President now, I should say, President Carter, is that he's not a man that you can predict very well. His press office might tell you he's going to spend the afternoon in his house, and the next thing you'll know, he'll show up on the other side of town. He may, on the spur of the moment, decide to go dove hunting. He just is... likes to be his own fella, and so we're seeing right here, nobody had any word at all on this, and maybe that was for security reasons. Maybe they planned it all along.
My guess is that it was for security reasons, and I would guess, Bob, that they certainly had planned it. Past presidents have tried to live their own lives with as much whimsy as this would seem to indicate, and they found it doesn't work. The security people really have a clamp on the president, and they simply talk him out of this sort of thing. And if he just got out of that car and started down there, I can hardly believe that.
But, you know, I'll tell you, Walter, he pulls surprises on the Secret Service from time to time. I remember once when he decided to go up to Atlanta during the transition period to interview candidates for his cabinet. He dropped that news on us one morning outside the warehouse. Somebody just asked him, do you have any plans today? He said, well, I'm going to Atlanta tomorrow. One of the agents, whose name I will not mention, said, listen, if you hear anything else about that, let us know, will you? It came as a surprise. The other night, down in Plains, Mr. Carter decided one Saturday to go to a wedding. He walked out of his house, and the agent said, what's up, sir? He said, we're going to a wedding. I said, well, you can't do that. We haven't checked out the church yet. He said, get in the car, I'll show you where it is.
Well, of course, there's another feature of this walk. If he does intend to make this walk all the way, it's going to delay the parade and the rest of the performance because it's going to take him some time to walk 1.5 miles. What would that be? About probably half an hour, huh?
Well, I would say at least a half hour to 45 minutes.
I've walked that, cover a mile in about 20 minutes, do you?
Route myself a couple of times when you're unable to get a cab to try to get from one end of Pennsylvania Avenue to the other. That's no short walk. That's a long walk, but
what an impression this will make. You know, he said this is going to be the people's inaugural. People are going to get a chance to see him. You'll kind of share, at least vicariously, in the experience of the new administration. And he does that all the way down Pennsylvania Avenue, and he has dictated that there not be stands along that route and seats to be sold. Even if the inaugural goes in the hole, he wasn't going to charge for seats. He said people were going to be able to stand and see the president and the parade come by.
Really is a spectacular sight, isn't it? Look, the President of the United States, the man who holds the most powerful office in the free world, walking down that great avenue. And he's enjoying it, too, isn't he, Walter? Yeah. It's really his moment.
And he's down the hill now. He's on Pennsylvania. Yeah. He's well on his way. No indication he's going to get in the car.
No, I would suspect he's pretty close now to the intersection of Constitution Avenue, where Constitution V's into Pennsylvania Avenue. I can't tell from the picture. Mrs. Carter, of course, walking that in heels. Unless she switched to walking shoes, I can't see there. That's she's wearing boots today, isn't she? High-heel boots.
Golly, you've got to say that's some first. That is something. 29 degrees out there with a 15-mile-an-hour wind. So you can figure that out, I'm sure, quickly, Robert, as to what the wind chill factor is. But it's not warm. That's a brisk walk. He's setting a good pace. I don't suppose they're suffering the cold that much. Charles Kuralt is along the route that the Carters are walking. Charles? Hello, Charles.
Walter, all these people who are straining for a glimpse of the man who's been president for an hour and a half now, are getting their wish. He is about 50 yards behind us, walking, smiling, and waving. Mrs. Carter also waving and smiling to the crowd. And this crowd, which numbers in the thousands, several deep along Pennsylvania Avenue, we're just now approaching the National Gallery of Art. And from here, it appears to be Jimmy Carter's intention to walk all the way. He's enjoying it. And this crowd, which is all dressed up in parkas and ski attire, a much jollier bunch, as I remember 4 years ago. The inaugural parade of Richard Nixon was a much more formal affair. This seems to me to be just an outburst of gaiety, both on the part of the people and on the part of their new president, who's strolling along back there over my shoulder, waving and smiling and quite obviously enjoying it all.
Charles, can you hear me?
Yes.
I know it's pretty noisy there in the car and on the parade route, but did you get any clue as you got in position in that parade? I know you're up ahead of the president and the new first lady. Did you get any indication he was going to be walking?
None at all, Walter. Honestly, the worst place to watch a parade from is in it, I imagine. And I just turned around and there he was. It surprised everyone, I think. I even saw some surprised looks on the faces of some Secret Service men who had intended to ride just back here behind us. They're walking too now.
Well, they're supposed to be in physical shape for this sort of thing, but as far as doing their job of security, I imagine it's giving them considerable concern. This is the very first time ever that a president has walked all the way back to the White House from the Capitol. I believe, if our research is correct, Jefferson did walk in 1801 back, but he only walked to his boarding house and not to the White House. The 1829 Jackson walked up to the Capitol, but he rode back, and others rode horseback and then into carriages. William Henry Harrison, one of the coldest inaugurals ever, he was 68 years old, rode up in horseback, insisted on it, bare head and without a coat. And of course, he caught his death of cold. He died of pneumonia just a month later.
You know, Walter, seeing all those people following along behind, as you can see along the edges of the crowd, people running to catch up, it's a little bit like, really, I guess, the first parade that they had, the first formal parade, I guess, was 1805, which kind of happened by accident. That was Thomas Jefferson's second, I guess. Yeah. And there were a lot of mechanics, I'm told, from down at the Navy Yard, which is down at that end of Washington, who just sort of fell in spontaneously as the entourage was moving back up toward the White House. And you're seeing something very much like that. You're seeing people along the parade route following along with the president, just as spontaneous action.
Yeah. That's that was the first music, too, Bob. You know, in those days, people who played a musical instrument, usually a flute or something of that kind, or a little drum, used to have a great habit of just a spontaneous marching concert, apparently. Mm-hmm. And they did that, I gather, with old Jefferson on that trip back. By gosh, this is almost unbelievable.
The Carter children there. I think that's Jeff, just to Mrs. Carter's left there. He's waving. He was spending a lot of time up on the inaugural stand taking pictures. He's an amateur photographer.
Now, you know, they loaded the cars up. Jeff and his wife were in the car originally, and they weren't there just a few minutes ago. They must have decided to get out and join the group. Goodness knows who'll be there by the time they get to the White House.
I'm not a betting man. Well, actually, I am a betting man, Walter. I'd almost bet you that this is the spur of the moment thing. If Governor Carter and very few others knew this was going to happen.
I would think it would have leaked out. If it did not, and they'd planned it in advance, Bob, it indicates that they're going to do a pretty good job of holding secrets in the White House, because that sort of thing usually does get out. As a matter of fact, that walk from 15th up the Blair House, a 2-block walk that he was going to take, and we were billboarding here as quite unusual a little earlier. That walk was supposed to be kept secret by all of the press. They were tipping us off so that, because we had to get our units, our mobile units out of the parade and so forth, so they had to let us know something. They felt, and they did, but it leaked out, you know, it always does.
Sure.
But this one, it was.
But they're well on their way. They're coming
Yeah.
just past the new Smithsonian Aeronautics Museum there. That's the big, unusual-looking building there just behind them.
They're at what, about third now, third or fourth?
Well, you can see the distance they've come from the Capitol there.
I don't know what that public address system is we hear pick up every once in a while down there. They had a public address system along the entire route of the march so that those who were gathering for the parade could hear the services up at the Capitol. You know, you can understand as you watch this why the security people are concerned. He's moving, of course, much more slowly than they would like to have the president move. Now that it's known that he's doing this, people around the crowd can keep up and organize their insane operations, whatever they might be. And he is moving slowly, not protected by a car. If you remember at Nixon's inaugural in 1969, we had several demonstrations.
Rocks thrown at the car.
Thrown at 14th Street, and they speeded up the car to get it out of the way. There were rocks and pennies and things thrown. A beer can was thrown. And as a matter of fact, at one point, at the time when the Secret Service said, "Let's go," and moved up the car, a huge ball of tinfoil came out of the crowd, and obviously it looked like something more dangerous than it was, but that was when the service said, "Let's go," and they moved. They've sped up to 15th, made that turn, then slowed down again.
You know, that's one of the striking things about what we're seeing here today, Walter. I think it was one of the police officials in Washington said today, there's no anger in the streets this time. This is the first inaugural parade we've had in a long time, where we haven't had some kind of demonstration of one kind or another. You remember that big demonstration they had over at the Washington Monument while the inaugural ceremonies were going on, 72.
As a matter of fact, Bob, you know who one of the scheduled speakers was for that meeting at the Washington Monument? He did not get there, as several other people didn't, because of they felt at the last minute it would be improper. But one of the scheduled speakers was Senator Walter Mondale of Minnesota. Just think, one time he was in that protesting mood, and now here he is as the Vice President of the United States.
Be on the inaugural, on the reviewing stand today, watching this parade.
Incidentally, we've been told that the principals of that inaugural, President Nixon is at his home in San Clemente. Vice President Agnew is, we are told, at his headquarters out of Crofton, Maryland, at his office today. He's a consultant these days for various management firms, does a lot of foreign overseas work, and he's spending the day in his office, according to the information our CBS News people got.
Some controversy, of course, when former President Nixon was given an invitation to this inaugural. Mr. Agnew was not invited to come today, but Mr. Nixon actually was. I don't know if he ever formally declined that invitation. The Carter people received word about a week ago that he wouldn't be there. Some question if he had accepted where he would have sat during the ceremonies today, whether he would have been afforded a place.
Former presidents don't usually come to inaugurals. I don't believe in our history they have. And for that reason, it would seem to hinge in some way on the new administration coming in. There were none of the presidential widows here either, although they were all invited. There are 4 today. Going back to Bess Truman, she's at home in Independence. Mamie Eisenhower is up in Gettysburg, we believe. There was some thought she might come down at the last minute, but I guess the cold determined for her that she would not. And then there was Lady Bird Johnson, of course. She's back at the ranch in Texas, we're told.
Her daughters were here today.
Yes.
Both of them, as a matter of
both
fact.
Linda and Lucy.
Lucy and Linda.
Linda's husband, Chuck Robb, is trying to follow in his father-in-law's footsteps in politics, running in Virginia. And Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis also, I should have mentioned. She, we believe, is in New York. At least she did not accept the invitation to come down. Photographers are having a little different chore here than they thought they were going to have. They normally are in a van, open truck with a platform on it, to take the pictures of this sort of a procession.
That's
now they're on foot too.
Some of our viewers might think that's President Ford walking along beside the governor there, or beside the president there. That's Dick Kaiser, who is the chief of the White House Secret Service detail, and is almost a look-alike for President Ford. Often during the campaign, crowds would think they were seeing the president just for an instant, and then they would realize that it was Mr. Kaiser. I understand he will be staying on as the head of the detail for Mr. Carter.
President Ford is well on his way to California now. An Air Force plane that was loaned to him for this trip into his retirement. After 28 years of public service, 29 months, 11 days in the White House. The only president never elected to either the presidency or the vice presidency, but Bob, we saw up there on Capitol Hill how popular President Ford has become in this city. He got, I'd say, as much applause as did President Carter. And when one of the 7 times that President Carter got applause in his inaugural speech was in his first line where he paid tribute to President Ford, and that was a long and sustained applause.
Well, this town has a very warm feeling about Jerry Ford. He's been here for a long time. He has many friends here. There are a lot of people over the years who have disagreed with him, you know, on policy disputes, policy matters of one kind or another. You very seldom, in fact, I can never recall running into anybody who said that they didn't like him personally. Most unusual covering the White House. I cannot recall a single reporter that I knew who covered the White House who disliked Gerald Ford in a personal way. He's a nice fellow.
Excuse me, but we got a pretty good view there down Pennsylvania Avenue. That's the Archives building, I think, in the background. That would put them up at what, about 5th Street by now? 4th or 5th? What are they pausing for, do you suppose?
There's no way to know.
No?
This is all a surprise to us, this entire...
They've slowed down. As we said, this is a 1.5 mile walk that they have undertaken if they go the whole distance. And something that I'm a little puzzled about, I don't know whether some of our reporters out along the route who may be hearing me could answer it, but there were bands along the parade route, stationary bands, I believe 8 of them, to entertain the crowd while they were awaiting the passing of the parade itself. And during, I thought, the motorcade, I'm wondering why they haven't struck up a tune, or maybe they're so in awe of this performance, as the rest of us are, that they're blowless.
To see 8 band directors along the way saying, "What am I supposed to do now?"
Yeah, nobody told me to play when they walked by. They said when they rode by. That looks like a private building, and it's back some distance from the parade from Pennsylvania Avenue itself. It's on one of those side streets that comes into the Pennsylvania Avenue, which is a diagonal. It's one of the, that particular one we wouldn't condemn, but it's part of the tawdry aspect, at any rate, of Pennsylvania Avenue, which is so offended people down through the years. There, I think we hear some music. Maybe were listening in. But anyway, they've had a plan for about the last 10 years to tear down all those private buildings and build some new buildings, some government buildings, and then they abandoned that plan and went to a plan to build private structures, but in keeping, in harmony with the rest of it. That is the old post office building, which is not one of those buildings I was talking about. It has a certain kind of a Gothic Rococo elegance to it in its own way. The old FBI building, they're coming up there now, and they're just passing on the left, to which you cannot see, and left of your picture, to their right, probably one of those horrible buildings in Washington, the new FBI building, which if all of the dictators down through history had gotten together and said, what can we build that looks like a secret police prison, they'd have come up with that building.
All the Carter children are out there now. His son Jack, his son Chip. Chip is the one in the middle walking with his wife. He has on the light coat there.
And his wife's very brave to be out there. She, as you might observe there, is anticipating their first child, and in only less than a couple of months. It's in March sometime.
That's right. They're going to live in the White House. And so is Jeff, the younger son. Chip is the middle son. I thought it was kind of funny. I was looking through some research the other day, and the Ford children had talked at one time or another about how difficult it was to live in the White House. They asked Jeff if he looked forward to it. He said, sure. He said, I'd be crazy to pass it up. He said, of course I'm going to live there.
There's going to be a bigger crowd in the White House than there's been at any time since Franklin Roosevelt, when several of his children were there with him. They've been in a long time. Let's go back to Charles Kuralt, who is still riding. Charles, is there any significance to that?
I'm sorry, Walter. I know you asked a question, but I couldn't hear what it was.
Of absolutely no significance. I was asking if there was any significance to your still riding and not joining the throng and walking there. The significance, I know, is that you've got a camera and a lot of microphone equipment to accompany you.
Well, this really is a lot of fun, Walter. This is, I'm sure, the happiest inaugural parade in a long time. Excuse me just a minute. You just can't imagine what joyous faces we're seeing as we ride along here. There's only one face that looks serious, and it's the face of H. Stuart Knight, the Secret Service director, who's riding in a car right in front of me. He's looking around a little nervously, but it's a very exceedingly happy crowd. All these people from whom Jimmy Carter said he hoped to gain strength in his inaugural speech are now straining for a glimpse of the man who has been for 2 hours president. And they're getting an awfully good, an unusually good look at their new president today.
Looks like there's quite a crowd there, Charles. We haven't heard a police estimate yet. And of course, from these monitors, we couldn't estimate. Have you made any horseback guess or Chevrolet back or whatever it is you're riding in?
Very hard to estimate the size of the crowd. I think that's the question you're asking me. But it is dozens deep, especially in the sunny parts of the parade route, like the part we're passing along now as we approach the Treasury building and the turn up 15th Street toward the White House.
Not to introduce an ominous note or anything like that, but this is just the location where the only demonstration against a president returning to the White House has ever taken place, and that was the one against Nixon that we were telling about a little while ago. Incidentally, there were 3 scheduled demonstrations today, none of them of any great anger, none affecting the parade or anything of that sort. The Yippies were going to have a little meeting at the Washington Monument, and I think a progressive socialist group was going to have a little march, counter-inaugural march, but nothing like the days of the Vietnam War.
What is the vice president and the other members of the cabinet? I wonder if they're, I suppose they're in their cars back there. We haven't seen them. I suppose they'll be
I guess I wonder if there hasn't been considerable. Amy's joining them now, getting her coat buttoned up. She's going to make the walk now. The rest of the distance, which is only really about 5 blocks. I'd say they have to go. They strided along at a pretty good clip there. Now that was just about 20 minutes so far. And they say Jason, who is Jeff's son, 1-year-old son. Yep, he's on his he's on his father's shoulders, I guess. You can't see if that's Jeff or not, but it looks like it. Between the knees of his head between the knees of Jason. While Jeff is going to continue to practice law down in Georgia and not live in the White House, they say that Jason is such a favorite of President Carter's that they expect they're going to be spending quite a bit of time there. I imagine they will.
Now the Commander-in-Chief's Guard, originally established by an order of General Washington.
You know, there must... Bob, can you imagine the consternation back there in the cars with the cabinet and those others as to whether they ought to get out and walk or not? And the argument would have to go, well, certainly we ought to, but no, on the other hand, this is his idea. If he wanted us to walk, he would have said so. But there must have been going on this argument all the way down Pennsylvania Avenue.
Absolutely. And in no place would that argument go on like it would in Washington. Because do you remember back in the Kennedy administration where the president took to not wearing a top coat, so all the rest of them thought they should not wear top coats, and they all. I remember over at the Pentagon when we had a change from Mel Laird to Secretary of Defense to James Schlesinger, everybody in the staff switched from smoking cigars to pipes because that's what the top man smoked. I bet you're exactly right. I bet there was all kind of, what do we do? Should we get out? Would that be upstaging? Would we?
You know, Amy was pretty attentive. I kept watching her from our vantage point during the inaugural services. She was pretty attentive a couple of times. She moved up from sitting next to Miss Lillian, her grandmother, to sitting in her mother's lap, sort of leaning against her mother's lap. And a couple of times she seemed to be getting a little bit nervous in the service there, and said a few words to Mother. Mother leaned over and said a few words to her. Last night at the gala, she lasted through most of it and then folded about midway in the second half. You know, Charles Taft's son back in 1909 was one of the youngest who was up on the platform in modern history, 11 years old. And he had a copy of Treasure Island he read through the whole service, which is understandable.
This is Governor Carter. I keep calling him Governor Carter. President Carter did put on a top coat before he started this. I'll tell you, I was standing, Walter, up there on that platform when he was reading that speech, and I don't know how he got through it with just a suit coat on. Just freezing cold. I guess the temperature a little bit freezing. But, both he and President Ford were without their top coats up there.
They've turned the corner now, and they're coming up 15th Street. You see the old Treasury building in the background. Turned the corner by the Washington Hotel. And they've got about a short block now up to where Pennsylvania Avenue resumes, and then 2 fairly long blocks maybe 3 blocks down to Blair House. If he goes all the way, I suppose he will. He's going to go down Blair House so that all of those in the reviewing stands, which are around the White House, will have a chance to see him walk. He's just about now to the point a half hour later where he was going to start walking under the plan.
This is the only uphill part of the journey. There's a slight incline on the street here. Somebody seems to have some trouble with a shoe or something.
Can't tell what happened back there. Oh, it was Amy. She was tying her shoe or something. I guess Amy tying her shoelace.
But they've got it made now. They're almost there.
I wonder if they're going to point that out to Amy, that she got her name in lights. That's on the old RKO Theater. It used to have vaudeville shows. The days gone past.
They'll be able to see the reviewing stand now in just a minute or two. They're almost to the corner. There's the Vice President. He did ride forward.
Eric Severide tells a story, says he's not sure whether it's apocryphal or not, that Woodrow Wilson, staid, dignified Woodrow Wilson, used to slip out of the White House in the afternoons and go and sit in the last row at the Radio Keith Orpheum, the Orpheum Theater up there, the one they just passed, to watch the vaudeville show.
I really expect that President Carter will try things like that from time to time. He really means this, apparently, about getting out and meeting the people and trying to break down all this layers of security and so forth that have surrounded modern presidents. Is very serious about that. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if one night we just suddenly found out that he and Mrs. Carter had gone to a restaurant for dinner or gone to a movie. When he asked for those suggestions, remember that one fellow suggested that he eat in hamburger stands, that was the way to get to know the people.
Well, there's no question that the imperial prerogatives of our presidency, whether a man intends to maintain that kind of an aloofness, as it seemed that President Nixon did, or whether he intends something else, isolated from the people. It's very hard for the President of the United States to really know how difficult it is to get an airline reservation or to get in line for a quick service at a food store somewhere. I think that...
Walter, look at Amy. She's doing just what little kids always do. She's trying to stay on that center stripe there, walking like a tightrope. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No. Remember the old step on a crack, break your mother's back? My gosh, you just the whole idea of getting out there and making this walk has got to be impressive, that Carter means it, getting next to the people and letting the people share in this presidency. He's got a long way to go with some very tough programs and some very tough problems. But he's trying to give this thing the appearance of a fresh start with a tradition-shattering walk down Pennsylvania Avenue.